Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again in this YouTube astrological segment. I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Samantha Sharkus. There was a death that had taken place. Name again, Samantha Sharkus was found with marks on her neck and either unconscious or very close to it. It was in a hotel room on November 4th, 2017 in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Now, she was taken to the hospital and was declared brain dead 3 days later on November 7th, 2017. Now, it was ruled a suicide through the hanging. Um, but the thing about this, though, is many believe that this was actually ostensibly murder. And the thing is, she had multiple injuries on her body, and the marks that were made on her, that were on her neck, that were presumed by the investigators to be from a towel, did not seem consistent with that, and appeared to have likely been done through a strangulation. And the thing about this is, and many do believe and suspect that it was done by her father, John Bruno Sharkus. Now, other injuries she sustained in addition to the marks on her neck are she had injuries to the scalp, the nose, leg, the left ear, and her hand. Now, what I'm going to be and the thing is, when you have a number of injuries like that, that's another red flag as far as perceiving something as a suicide, because you're usually not going to have that many other injuries on your body in addition to anything on your neck. And so it does look very suspicious, to say the absolute least. Now, what I'm going to do in the video is I'm going to talk about, as far as astrology, the transits, natal placements that may be tied in to her tragic and very untimely passing. And what I want to get at is, first I'm going to be looking at, go to her chart. And the thing about this is, and even just the fact in her chart, okay, she's a sun in Virgo, moon in Leo, and a Virgo ascendant. The first thing I want to state, obviously, it's a contrast in terms of the sun in Virgo, but she's expressing outwardly, a more shy, demeanor, and Virgo ascendant, especially the outer demeanor, more shy, a little bit, reticent, type of personality. In the moon in Leo, at least on an unconscious level, she, she obviously had more, extroversion and gregarious energy. Falls in her 12th house of restrictions. That might have not been shown to many people, except those, maybe that energy was expressed more, with others, in private and solitude and seclusion. But going to the transits, natal placements in her chart that may have been tied in to the passing, well, the one thing is, in her natal chart, she does have Pisces on the cusp of the 8th house, and this is, has a lot of meaning to it, and can, correlate, with why, what, as far as possible manner of death. The 8th house in astrology, of course, does correspond with death. Having Pisces on it, well, that can manifest in a multitude of ways. One thing, obviously, is that the death could be very nebulous and unclear, that there were details that may have been missing from it. That would probably be a vast understatement, because Pisces is the opposite of Virgo, and Virgo obviously is very punctilious with details. Not only that, but it could also, well, they say, not they say, Pisces is also associated with suicide. Interestingly enough, that's what it was ruled, but that is not likely what really happened. That ruler of one of the rulers of the 8th house is of course, Neptune is one of the rulers. That is retrograde, and that to me is could be a red flag, and indicator that it's like a false suicide ruling. Now, Another thing about this having Pisces on the cusp of the 8th house, it indicates that if somebody did indeed murder her, that person may have been involved in drugs and or alcohol at the time of the death. And the fact, keep in mind that the 8th house is also associated with criminal investigation, and that could be an indicator that the investigators may have been somewhat lazy, lackadaisical, lethargic, and apathetic. And the thing about this too is when I look at this, when I look at the chart, another thing is that having Pisces on the cusp of the 8th house, that could also suggest deception and duplicity in the manner of death. And the thing about it, to me, again, it does ostensibly look like a murder to me, and it may have been ruled a suicide, but I really don't believe that is really what took place. The thing about it is, going back to the fact that one of the rulers, again, is one of the rulers of the 8th house of death is Neptune. Interestingly enough, it is an Aquarius, and again, that ruler is retrograde. Well, the fact that Neptune is connected with suicide is retrograde can be an indicator, again, that it was like a fallacious suicide ruling. And Aquarius is also the sign associated with the unusual and the bizarre. Now, in a video about her death on YouTube, it was stated that there were bizarre posts that were made around the time of her death. Now, I think some of that astrologically is certainly tied into one of the rulers of the 8th house of death being Neptune in Aquarius. Neptune, again, is associated, that was one of the rulers of her 8th house of death, and it falls in the zodiac sign that's connected with the bizarre and the unusual. And another thing about this too is that the Neptune placement, being in Aquarius, now is also square Jupiter in her natal chart, which is the other ruler of the 8th house, because Jupiter and Neptune both rule Pisces. That 8th house cusp has two rulers. The fact that the other ruler of the 8th house of death, that is Jupiter, which is connected with the law, truth, veracity, is in stubborn, obstinate, even sometimes indolent Taurus. What it tells me that, given that Jupiter is associated with the law, this is no surprise that the law was in conflict with the manner of what the actual death was, because Jupiter is connected with the law, and Neptune was one of the rulers of the 8th house, and those planets square each other. Now, the thing about it is, given that it was retrograde energy can represent going away, going in another direction. And it's like the law basically may have looked the other way as far as this case goes. Jupiter being retrograde in her chart may have also, I would say, may have manifested in delays connected with the law and getting the truth and veracity and connection with it. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, as far as her chart in this, the 4th house. The 4th house in astrology is connected with the end of life, the latter part of life. Sometimes the end of life, of course, can be associated with death. Now, she has Scorpio on the cusp of the 4th house. Now, in some cases, this can manifest in a Scorpio, sun, moon, or ascendant being prominent in the end of someone's life, for better or worse. Now, the father-son sign is in Scorpio, who many believe should be at least considered a primary suspect in the case. And Hold on a moment. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, now both, and oddly enough, this house, the fourth house, is also has two rulers in it. And the thing about this is as well, I mean, Mars and Pluto both rule the fourth house of Scorpio, and they both fall in the fourth house of the end of life. Now, this could suggest that the end of life may be tied in to a home or family member, and it took place at this motel, and that I guess was presumably that was her home at the time. So the end of life did transpire in one's home. In fact, again, I want to rewind a second. Going back to the fact Scorpio is on the cusp of the fourth house can also indicate the end of life. I mean, it was, the manner of it was very surreptitious. If she was murdered, was done surreptitiously, and it's obviously something nefarious is tied into this as well, something more sinister and diabolical. The thing is that this could also, again, the fact that Mars and Pluto, both rulers, are in the fourth house, both the rulers of the fourth house are in the fourth house, is an indicator that the end of life, not only being in the home, but was, that a family member or home member factored in, was prominent in this. Now, another thing is that the fact that they do conjunct each other as well. Now, Chiron, Mars and Pluto all form a series of conjunctions in that fourth house. Now, Chiron is the asteroid associated with physical wounds, and it's in vengeful, sadistic, and surreptitious Scorpio. It's also very close to the 29th degree, the anaretic, which is considered anaretic degree in astrology. 29 degrees in astrology symbolically can reflect endings. Scorpio is the sign of death and murder. It's also sadistic in a very negative manifestation. Now, Chiron and Scorpio can also suggest that the person causing physical wounds and suffering at the end of, in this case, the first end of life, can be a Scorpio, Sun, Moon, or Ascendant, or embody Scorpio characteristics. It can also, what it is too, the fact that Chiron and Mars and Pluto are all conjunct each other. That's integration of all that energy. Chiron, again, connected with physical wounds and suffering. Mars is volatile actions, can be cuts, contusions, violent energy. Pluto is associated with death and ruthlessness, murder. And the fact that Mars and Pluto are both in Sagittarius, this might have been flavored with very foolhardy, reckless, and self-righteous energy done in a very foolhardy and reckless manner, perhaps. And the thing about this too, and also Sagittarius energy is also very overconfident energy. The fact that all this energy is squaring her Virgo ascendant, and the ascendant, of course, is associated with the physical body, certainly didn't help matters. Another thing too, which could likely point to the father at least playing an integral role in her death, the fact that it was that transit Saturn rules the father in astrology, in Sagittarius, was in her fourth house of the end of life at the time of her death, and it was in fairly close proximity to her natal Black Moon Lilith. And Black Moon Lilith in astrology can be associated with death as well. It is very comparable to the planet Pluto. And she has the Black Moon Lilith in astrology in her natal chart in cold, callous, undemonstrative Capricorn. And the thing is, in looking as well at this, at the chart and her sad passing, Now, the Black Moon Lilith was also in Sagittarius at a critical degree, the 29th degree, and the 29th degree again can be connected with endings, and that was also in the 4th house of the end of life at the time of her death. And the thing about this too is that transit Saturn was also conjunct transit Black Moon Lilith in the 4th house of her end of life, and that could be another indicator that a father can be involved in a death. And another thing that stood out to me is that, oddly enough, this took place, the assault or whatever this was, took place the day after the father's birthday. The transit that stood out to me at this time was transit Sun and Scorpio was making an opposition to the focal point in a fixed T-square configuration in her chart. Now, when this happens in astrology, often significant events can transpire. The Sun in astrology is associated with the biological father, and it's in Scorpio. Sure enough, her father is a Sun in Scorpio. And it's opposing Saturn, or at least a long opposition to her natal Saturn, and Saturn is about authority. Doing things lawful, working within parameters, we're being regulations. And oddly enough, it is in opposition to it. It's adversarial to that, to her natal Saturn in Taurus, which of course is the focal point of the fixed T-square configuration in her natal chart. Now, other points in her in that fixed T-square configuration is her it's her Moon conjunct Venus in Leo, which is opposing Uranus and Aquarius retrograde, and both those points are making the square to the natal Saturn in Taurus. Now, the thing about this is the Moon, even though it's connected with the home life, it can be associated with introversion. It can also be associated with the public, and Leo is the sign connected with notoriety and recognition, and it's also dramatic. So this was something, sadly, that may have garnered some notoriety and recognition, even though this was a negative, obviously, thing that happened. Uranus and Aquarius retrograde may have played the role in, as far as her natal placement. Uranus and Aquarius retrograde may have played a role, again, going to the bizarre text messages that likely weren't there, because Uranus can be associated with the bizarre and unusual, and Aquarius can be connected with electronics and electronic devices. Being retrograde, showing, could be the indicator that it's not coming from her. Now, Saturn is also, Saturn, which is connected with authority in her chart, it's in Taurus retrograde. And then, again, that was being opposed by the Sun. The Sun is connected with the biological father in Scorpio. So, the fact that Saturn is also retrograde tells me that that could be an indicator that authority was not working in her favor. Now, another thing, too, as far as the injuries go, transit North Node at the time in Leo was conjunct her natal Venus in her chart. And Venus can be connected with the voice and the throat. Now, at the time, transits, transits that involve the North Node can manifest in issues that one may have to address or confront. Venus, again, does rule the throat. In astrology, there were markings on her neck at the time when the investigators came. The thing about this is, if she was indeed strangled, being in Leo, this may have been done as an expression of dominance and power. Venus is also again associated with the voice, and it is retrograde, and in the her 12th house of limitations and restrictions. So that might have figured in terms of her having some restriction, maybe being able to maybe yell or scream at the time if she was indeed murdered. Uh, the thing is, it may have been difficult for her to say anything more so than in most cases, and compared to others being in a comparable situation. Hold on a moment, people. Now, the thing is, um, now this can also be another thing I noticed too is that in her chart, in the transit Mars was in her second house at the time, and we wonder, well, what does that have to do with what likely went down? Well, Mars is about injuries and cuts, contusions, and you're talking about the second house. All houses in astrology correspond, anatomically with the body, but they correspond with body parts. The second house is connected with the throat and the neck. Mars is about injury. And also she had transit Mercury was also conjunct her natal Chiron at the time. Mercury can be about the hand, can be connected with the hands. Chiron can be about emotional ones, but physical ones as well. And another thing is that, and the understanding is that one of her hands were injured at the time. And being in Scorpio, there's obviously, to me, that could be more sinister energy, diabolical energy connected with that. Well, and I also want to say, and I should have said this at the beginning of the video, anyone that sees this that's a close family member or friend of Samantha Sharkus, that I do offer my condolences out in prayers, and that justice is served, because again, this to me it looks like it's ostensibly a murder and not a suicide. That justice is served, and she could truly rest in peace in having the right thing done and get this, whether it's the case reopened or what have you, and to reinvestigate whatever needs to be done in order to actually find justice for her. But anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying, stay well.